Welcome to episode 10 of the Critical Coach podcast. If you want to support me, you can do so by getting some gear from the website, thecriticalcoach.com/shop, or simply share some of my content on your social media platform of choice. If you enjoy the podcast, follow it on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, or give it 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to check out part 2A of my series on exercise hierarchies. Part 1 introduced the concept of an exercise hierarchy and how we can define complex exercises in simple terms. Part 2A develops that process to define and understand the relationships between exercises. You'll be able to find it on the front page of the website at thecriticalcoach.com. In this episode, I'm talking to Ben Griffin, gym manager and coach at RealFITT Strength and Conditioning. He holds a Bachelor of Coaching Science and a Master of Exercise Science, specialising in exercise physiology. We talk about Ben's time at university, why he went and what he got out of it, his time as an intern with the Gamecocks at the University of South Carolina, his passion for athlete development, and being an introverted coach in an industry full of extroverts. Cheers. So you said on your own podcast you weren't really sure what you wanted to do after school, but you decided to go to university anyway. Now that's a pretty significant commitment of time and money, especially if you're not sure what you wanted to do. So what motivated you to want to go to university and sort of incur that commitment?
Good question. I think partly part of that is just being young and naive at the time as well. So it was just the standard thing. You finish school and you're like, you're going to go to uni, and you're like, yeah, I'm going to go to uni. And then I've just always been interested in that kind of sport, exercise, training, all that sort of stuff.
Oh, I should say you went to uni to study sports science, but it was
so
coaching
it was called
science.
Coaching science at the time, but it's literally now just your exercise science degree.
Yeah.
I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, and I kind of just followed my interests really and looked interesting, so I ended up going there. But at the time, I definitely didn't think about the cost or any of that sort of stuff. That just never entered my head. It was just like, yeah, I'm just gonna go study this and see what happens, pretty much.
Did you have any expectations of what you thought you were going to get out of it?
Not really, to be honest. I knew I wanted to work in something along the lines of strength and conditioning. And when I was younger, I kind of, same as most people who go into those sort of degrees, I kind of had my heart set on something in that kind of high performance setting with like team sport environment, that sort of stuff. But yeah, it was literally more of a case of this is what I'm interested in. I'm just going to go study it, see where it takes me, and kind of see what happens. But yeah, like mainly young and naive, really.
Yeah. No, and I suspect that's fairly common with people. And it's probably easier to sort of make that leap in Australia because it's not like the US where you got to take out massive debts that, you're pretty much stuck with either until you die or you pay them off, because we've got the HEX system. It's sort of, if you're not earning enough, you can weather the storm a little bit more.
I think I definitely would have thought about it differently if I had seen the numbers straight away.
Like the cost?
Yeah. So because when you start, like you say, you just get HEX, you just get the help. So like you don't actually think about the numbers or see the grand total.
Yeah, when I was looking at courses and stuff, it shows you the cost for that course. There's no, I looked at a bunch of different unis and I never saw one where it said the minimum cost for this total degree is going to be this. It's like, this is how much. So you sort of have to go through every single course and tally it up yourself before you see that it's like.
Yeah, there's no way I would have done that when I was 18. It's like, yeah.
Did you think about doing like a Cert 3 or a Cert 4 in fitness?
No, that actually never entered my head. When I was thinking about applying for uni, no, that never entered my head. While I was at uni, I did, but not before I started uni.
What was uni like?
It was good. There was I guess there's really two sides to that question.
Yeah.
In terms of like the social experience as well, because I definitely enjoyed myself a lot while I was at uni. But then the actual study side of it was good. It's actually really interesting to reflect on it now because, like you kind of alluded to before, in terms of what I thought I was going to get out of it, I didn't really know where it was going to take me in terms of what specific skills they were going to teach and that sort of stuff. But looking back on it now, obviously doing what I do now, you can see how it's very theoretical and very data-y, very researchy, as opposed to it's not as practical as I probably would have liked, like reflecting on it now in hindsight.
Yeah, so you think is it more sort of preparing people to go into the research side of sports science rather than like high-level coaching maybe?
I think so.
Yeah.
And that also could be partly because I didn't gear it enough towards that as well. So it's probably partly my fault a little bit.
Like the courses you selected?
Yeah, and also like with prac experience, I probably wasn't smart enough in regards to that sort of stuff. But it's definitely weighted more in terms of knowledge and research, because even now, because obviously we have interns that come into RealFITT now, and they can come in and tell you all about stuff like post-activation potentiation and these sorts of things, but they don't know how, if someone comes in and doesn't know how to squat, they don't know where to start them.
Yeah, you think that would be, yeah.
They know what a good squat should look like, but they don't know how to start teaching someone how to do it.
Yeah, but I mean, would they be able to tell you that's why a squat should look that way? Or they're just, this is what I've been told a squat's supposed to look like, and if it looks like that, it must be, like, I don't need to look any deeper than that.
I think that depends on the individual student, how into it they go. But I think it definitely falls along a spectrum there. I think they can all tell you what it should look like. And then some will be able to tell you to varying degrees why it looks this way and how they should go about fixing it. But yeah, you get a massive broad array of knowledge and skills there.
Do you find it particularly useful in what you're doing now?
My degree?
Yeah, the first degree.
Honestly, in terms of laying a foundation of knowledge, in terms of anatomy, physiology, that type of stuff, yes. So from that point of view, it's very useful. But in terms of the actual practical day-to-day stuff, probably not really.
Yeah, because I find, like, even when you do the Cert 3, Cert 4, you do get some basic anatomy and physiology. But I suspect it's the same with uni, where it's really important information, but that link between, you know, essentially the bland theory stuff that you get and how it relates to the practical work you do, I find the little bit that I did at uni and the vocational level stuff, they never like show you the value of how that theoretical knowledge can actually impact practical application and problem solving and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think you're right. And yeah, there's definitely that kind of missing link, because obviously you get all that knowledge, you learn all the muscles, all the anatomy, physiology type stuff, but you don't kind of learn to use that knowledge in a practical setting, I guess is the best way to put it. Yeah.
So the guys and girls that come in here for the internships, did you have that sort of stuff available to you when you were at uni? Or is it something, you did have?
We did. So we did have that sort of stuff available, but it's just so limited in internships because there's not a lot. Well, especially back when I did uni, which is going back a little bit now. If you were going to do, say, if you didn't get an internship with one of, say, like basically the Brumbies or the Raiders, there was no kind of strength and conditioning coaches out there really, other than that. So if you were going to do any other stuff, it would have been in a clinic somewhere, or just not all gyms offer internships either. So maybe you could get lucky and get one in a gym somewhere.
Yeah.
And even then, it's kind of a bit of a lottery of the coaches you're going to be working with.
Like the people that are going to sort of mentor you through that process. And I guess the people you're going to be exposed to from, like, you know, the client side or the athlete side, you know, if you're working with Brumbies, they're probably, there's like a whole, you know, probably 2 decades worth of pre-selection that goes into who ends up in that team. And I sort of wonder whether it gives people maybe a skewed perspective of, you know, what they're expected to deal with out in the real world.
Oh, definitely. Because they kind of know how to say, they know what exercises to do and what combination of exercises to do to make someone, say, bigger and stronger and stuff, but they don't know how to teach them how to do the exercises. Yeah. Because they've already come in, no guys they're training know how to do the exercises. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
As opposed to, say,
they bring that competency with them.
Whereas, as opposed to, say, starting with someone who never squatted before.
Yeah. So for example, here at RealFITT, you might have someone who plays team sport and has been, you know, doing it for quite a while, but has never stepped into a gym to sort of supplement their ability to play the game by coming into a gym. And they've got, you know, all the, you know, say they play AFL or something, they're great at that, but they've got no idea how to do a deadlift or a squat or...
Yeah, exactly. Some of them Yeah, so you can deal with people who've literally never done anything in a gym before, which is kind of important. I think a lot of people who come out of university tend to lack in that area.
Yeah.
Being able to teach someone from the ground up.
Do you think that sort of lack of exposure maybe allows them, like, do you think they're probably overconfident? Not in the sense that they're arrogant, but they just haven't had that weakness. It hasn't been exposed for them, so they don't know that it's there.
Yeah, you might be right. It could be a lack of, it could be something where they don't even know, they don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
Just because it's never been brung up, maybe.
It's certainly like my experience with the people that have come in working here from uni, especially if they've like come straight out of uni and they don't have that sort of background of real world experience. Their knowledge is awesome, but their ability to sort of solve problems that they haven't seen before sort of isn't there. And it's almost, for some of them, it seems like they don't even have, they don't know how to start finding the answer to those problems either. They're sort of just like thrown into it and expected to figure it out almost.
Yeah, definitely. You get there. It's almost like sometimes they'll get a problem. They don't even know you're right. They don't even know where to start to kind of start figuring out.
To be honest, it's the same with Cert 3, Cert 4. And that's like the ASCA level, the Australian Strength and Conditioning Association level 1. Like you have to do practical experience as part of all of those things, but you get a pretty dry, explanation of, for example, what a squat is and what the common faults are. But as soon as you come up with someone who's got a fault that wasn't in the book that you learnt from, you're sort of like, well, what the fuck am I going to do now?
Yeah. And it's also about knowing, is this fault something I need to correct, or is it something that's not that urgent, or is it
there's multiple faults and you're like, well, which one do I go after first?
Yeah, exactly. I think these are all things you only can really learn from experience. There's no other way you can figure it out. Like once you've seen enough people squat, you kind of have an idea of what someone's going to look like when they're a beginner, and you almost know the mistakes they're going to make before they make them.
Yeah, because the body can only move in. I mean, you have some joints like the shoulders and the hips and the spine to some extent that have massive freedom in how they move, but most of the joints are, they're going to be fairly simple joints that can only flex or extend or do basic things. And once you sort of realize that, you're sort of like, I'm actually going to see, a handful of problems that just vary in the way they present rather than 500 different problems. It's like 10 different problems that can have 100 different variations or combinations or something like that. And then it starts to become easier to sort of figure out what's going on.
Yeah, you just tend to see the same issues over and over again.
Yeah.
Once you start to see enough people. And obviously every so often there's someone who comes out and you're just like, what the fuck is that? Like, something you've completely never seen before. But yeah, see enough people, you just start to see the same things over and over again.
Yeah. So maybe, just sort of inject more practical experience into that. I mean, it'll probably extend the degree a little bit.
Yeah. And then I think it's also about, there's only so much prac you can do. And then it's almost about them just getting out there and just start doing it. And you've almost got to, that first year as well, they're not going to know everything. That first year is going to be a bit rough in terms of like...
Yeah, especially if it's super guided practical experience where, the person running it knows what problems the person's going to have to solve. If you want to give them that confidence, just be like, you're going to go work here, do a placement for like a week or 2 weeks. And, hopefully you sort of vet the places they're going to work at. So, the coaches can sort of help them make sense of what they're dealing with and just be like, look, I can't tell you what problems you're going to face. You're just going to have to figure it out, and you're going to have these people to sort of help you.
Well, that's the other thing as well, because obviously a lot of people go on placement and they're not writing programs as such a lot of the time. They're just implementing programs written by someone else and working with people who've been taught by someone else.
Yeah.
So they're not actually doing that groundwork.
And their ability to sort of, I guess they probably don't have that much authority either then, because they can't really look at it and go, oh, now that I'm watching you, this isn't actually a very good exercise for you to be doing. Like say they've got push jerk or something like that, and they're like, dude, you don't even know how to like rack the bar properly and press it overhead. I need to regress you to a strict press. But if all you're doing is implementing someone else's plan, you can't make that call and then watch and see whether you made the right decision or not.
Yeah, and that is something I know we even find a little bit difficult here, trying to give them that sort of experience, because obviously clients come in here, particularly here, to work with specific coaches often.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to then give the intern, it's very hard to pass a client onto the intern because, they've come here to work with a specific coach.
Yeah, they're paying for it.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's finding ways to give them those experiences is a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. I guess if you wanted to give them that freedom, you sort of, I want to give you that freedom, but I also don't want to compromise, my long-term relationship with this person. So do you have to have
and what they do
the intern and the coach together?
Yeah.
So that they can sort of supervise that process so it doesn't go too far off the rails.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's kind of what we've done, is involve them in the initial assessment phase and then the phase of sitting down and actually coming up with a plan and a program for that client. So it's kind of just involving them in that process as much as possible and trying to let them have a say before you kind of come in and just say, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah. No, that seems like a pretty good way to do it. Okay. So after you did your sports science degree, you hung around and did, it was a master's of exercise physiology. Now, can you help me understand what exercise physiology is? Because every time I look at a definition of it, it's sort of hard to figure out, whether it's one thing or it's like a base level thing where you can go and do academic stuff or you can do rehab stuff or case management. It's sort of pretty broad.
Yeah, so you're right. There are kind of different streams you can go down with it. There's generally two kind of fields to it. There's kind of the scientific side of it. So EPs who work in a lab where they're analyzing different pieces of data and that information, that type of stuff. Then there's kind of your clinically trained EPs who work in a rehab setting. And then that can kind of branch off into case management stuff or clinical work. And then the idea with the clinical rehab is to kind of try and fill that gap after someone finishes with, say, a physio. So generally the idea, in a perfect world, the way it would work is someone gets injured, they go see a physio initially because the physio does that initial rehab phase. Then after that, ideally they should get referred on to an EP to kind of then start rebuilding their exercise capacity.
Yeah.
So that's ideally how, then after that, then they should go and work with a strength and conditioning coach to then kind of keep building on top of what they've regained.
Do you find, I don't really know that much about the field. Do you reckon most EPs would be able to sort of fill that gap appropriately? Because the few that I've come into contact with, I wouldn't necessarily be confident handing them from a physio to that EP. There's probably strength and conditioning coaches that I'd be much more comfortable handing them off to, just because they have that sort of understanding of that sort of, it's almost that real world experience seems to sort of color their decisions a bit more.
Yeah, I think it depends on the individual. So I do know the same as anything, I do know some really, really good EPs. And then you're right, then there's some others who I think they just don't have a broad enough experience of exercise. So I always encourage EPs to go and get some experience. If you're going to work as a clinical EP, I always tell them to go and get experience in a strength and conditioning facility so you understand the steps down the track.
Yeah, what you're preparing people for.
If you understand that, so if you have a specific goal in mind, you're going to prepare them to be able to do strength training in a gym. I think that really helps if you understand where you're going, where they're going long term.
I guess if I was in that position, I'd probably want to know which coach they were going to go to afterwards and be like, look, this is where they're coming from. Where do you want to take them so that you can sort of, so that you're working with each other instead, there wouldn't be a hard stop of, okay, you've done your EP stuff. Now you're going to go to the gym. There'd probably be some overlap between the two.
Yeah, you're right. No, you're right. In an ideal world, that's exactly how it should work.
Yeah.
There should definitely be some overlap. And it's because it's not like there's a clear cut point where you're done with the EP. It'd be like, if there's still exercise and stuff I need you to keep working on, but you're ready to start a bit more advanced stuff, for lack of a better word. And
I guess the cost as well. I think EPs have some sort of interaction with Medicare, don't they? Yeah. So you can get some of it covered on insurance.
Yeah.
But how much is like the cost for the individual going to dictate how quickly they get pushed from an EP onto a strength and conditioning coach? I think not that strength and conditioning coaches are cheap necessarily either.
Well, that's the other thing as well. See, a lot of people, so the way rehab works at the moment, a lot of people either most people just go see a physio for a couple of sessions and then that'll be it. And they think they're fine and they go away and they start to feel better and then all of a sudden their symptoms just come back again and they get stuck in that circle because they don't actually finish the process.
Yeah.
But you're right about the cost. So I think a lot of people will generally go and see a physio or an EP because they can get some of that money back quite often. But then they don't want to incur the ongoing expense of seeing a strength and conditioning coach. So that's where it usually stops. And I think money is definitely a factor in that.
So how is exercise physiology different to like the coaching science, sports science stuff that you've done? Like, were you pretty well set up for it on the theory side from what you'd done already?
Yeah. So it kind of just flows on really. Just goes more in depth down that kind of rehab path is basically the main difference. So the coaching science degree that I did was kind of very general, strength and conditioning, anatomy, all these sort of basic principles, all that basic stuff. Then the masters in EP kind of just went more specific down that EP rehab route.
You finished your masters of exercise physiology, and then I think, hopefully I'm quoting you correctly, you said that you poured thousands of dollars into educational content after you'd done uni, and this is online stuff with like, I think you was talking about like Eric Cressy and a few other people. What gap was that filling that you didn't get from uni?
So I guess that's kind of a longer story. So once I finished my undergraduate degree, I still didn't really know what I was going to do.
Yeah.
I was still like, I have this degree, but I don't even really know what it qualifies me for, and I don't know what I'm going to do. So that was kind of how I kind of stumbled into doing EP, because I was like, well, that's kind of down the path I want to go, and that kind of gives me some sort of recognizable qualification.
So were you just hoping that, like, I don't know, like maybe by the time I finish my coaching science degree, I'll have figured out what I want to do, and then you don't. So you go, oh, well, I'll do X-Phys, and by the time I finish that, I'll probably know what I want to do.
Pretty much. Well, obviously once I started the X-Phys, I kind of knew that's where I was going to go with it, down that X-Phys route. But yeah, I kind of really just stumbled into it, and I kind of always knew that I wanted to do S&C. I wanted to be in strength and conditioning, but there's just limited opportunities. If you don't kind of get in that high performance setting, there's kind of nowhere to go with it. And there was never any mention when I was at uni of private sector strength and conditioning. Was
it a thing at the time?
Not really. Yeah. Not that I knew of anyway. Maybe that was once again my lack of knowledge on that area possibly as well. But it was never mentioned once at uni.
So when were you doing your masters?
I think it was 2011 to 2013. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you would have had like the boom of CrossFit boxes, sort of around then. But yeah, I don't know how much I think like powerlifting and strongman gyms were still kind of a fringe thing. And
even like box gyms like RealFITT, they kind of were, there was some obviously, but they kind of weren't a well-known thing.
Yeah. So when you're doing your uni stuff, most of it's sort of preparing you for like high performance stuff or academic stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
But there's not a lot of opportunities like job wise in that. I mean, like you think like how many people how many people did you graduate with for your sports science, for your coaching science?
Oh, in undergrad, a lot. It would have been at least 50 plus.
Oh shit. So you think say like half of those people go, I want to go into academia, and go, well, there's, say 100 schools and there's 10 academic positions in each school. But if 100 schools are graduating 50 undergrad sports science people and half of them want to go into academia, there's no way in hell that they're going to find those jobs. It's going to get super competitive. And you'd think like the amount of money they're going to earn is probably not going to be too crash hot because there's just massive oversupply. And then you go, I'm going to go into strength and conditioning, and you're like, oh shit, now I've got to pay off this huge debt, and I could have got this job with a Cert 3 or a Cert 4.
Yeah, and you're right. There's just limited demand for those roles. So those few people that go into academia, yeah, like you said, there's limited opportunities there. Then in terms of strength and conditioning, in terms of like a high performance setting, which is what that degree prepares you for, there's even fewer opportunities in that. So,
and I imagine it'd be like, I mean, aside from being super competitive, I imagine who you know is a huge part of getting those jobs. Like, you know, people are vetted through their network essentially, and like, yeah, I don't know this guy, I'm busy, I'm not going to waste my time on this dude. Wait until someone gives you a recommendation or...
Oh, 100%. That was it. Like the people who got the better internships and stuff at uni, and then the ones who kind of got jobs afterwards. But it was all the people who just knew, who were either actually athletes in that system that were studying at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Or they just knew people and they kind of just got in through that way. Yeah. Which I'm not, which is just the way it goes. It's just the way it works.
I mean, it's a bit shitty, especially, I mean, I can understand from their end why they'd want to do it that way, because you sort of got like finite resources in the sense of, you know, how much time you can dedicate to it, and using your network as a way of like essentially gatekeeping, you know, time wasters out is probably beneficial for them. But for the individual coming up, it's sort of like, you know, maybe your competency isn't as important as your relationships and your network.
Yeah, which is a really interesting point. And I think there is a lot of truth to that. And looking back, that's something that I definitely didn't do well in terms of the networking and that sort of stuff. So that's something I kind of push to a lot of people I know now that are doing degrees and stuff. Like the networking is massive, yeah. Like just make sure as many people as possible know your name by the end of that degree, because you just don't know. And it's just something that I didn't do very well, so I try and push that message to anyone I know that's doing a degree, really, particularly in exercise science.
So I got sidetracked by the academia thing. What were the courses and stuff you were doing afterwards? What did you say? What was the gap you said they were filling? It was more like the performance practical.
Yeah. Okay. So where I was getting to with that is I kind of finished EP, then I kind of went off work and doing EP work for a while, but I knew I wanted to do S&C stuff. But I realized I had that knowledge gap between, like, I knew all of this theory stuff, but if I was to like get someone actually in the gym, I would like applying that is where I thought I would struggle. So what I did was I started looking up, this is when I kind of first became aware that the private sector was a thing. Mm-hmm. Private sector strength and conditioning was a thing. And it was mainly through American coaches because it's massive in America. Yeah. But it's severely underdeveloped in Australia. There's huge money
behind it, especially like, you know, you look at all the college teams and it's, you know, multiple teams at a college. There's enormous amounts of money in some of them. And they're like set up equipment-wise pretty damn well too.
Yeah, so what I did was I started looking for coaches that were kind of doing this private sector stuff. And I just found pretty much the best ones I could find in America, and then just started consuming all the resources they had. So this is kind of the point where I realized I needed to learn off practitioners. I needed to start learning off the people who are actually doing the coaching, as opposed to like I'd learned pretty much as much as I could, not as much as I could, but I'd learned a lot off, well, everything I'd learned to that point had been off people in academia. So I kind of realized I need to learn off these coaches who are actually out there doing it and getting results with athletes.
It seems, I mean, like if part of the degree is preparing people for high performance stuff, it seems like a massive oversight that the people training people for that don't necessarily have that practical experience.
Yeah, it's weird because some of them did. Like some of the people who were lecturing and teaching us at uni, they had that practical experience, but it just wasn't always conveyed well, I don't think, in the teaching.
You think, like, but even then, like you think communication is a pretty important skill for a coach. I mean, I understand, like, teaching is somewhat different to communicating it, so especially when you're doing it in a big class environment. But yeah, I don't know, maybe I just got a chip on my shoulder about it. So you started going through all that content, and then you started applying for internships in the US. That seems like a really long way to go to get practical experience. Had you like tried to get some here, or you just loved what was going on there maybe and thought, no, if I can get that, I want to do that?
Well, I think, so first of all, I'll say yes, I started consuming all that content off those coaches, and I decided the next step in the process was I need to get some sort of real world, high level practical experience. I just had a look around in Australia, but there's just really limited opportunities. And most of it is for people who are currently studying. So if you're not studying, it's really difficult to find anywhere that kind of offers internships at the level that I was kind of hoping to find. And I'd spoken to a few coaches in Australia who had gone over to America and done internships with colleges over there. So I just started looking into it, and it was more just the abundance of opportunities. Because like you kind of alluded to before, there's so many colleges over there and so many different sports programs and all. It's just massive. So there was so many opportunities. So I kind of just looked at it. And then part of it was like I was just ready for some sort of adventure too, I think.
Yeah, probably a bit sort of like cabin fever after being in uni for, what would it be, like 4 or 5 years or something like that?
Yeah, and then I worked for a few years on top of that. And then I was like, yeah, it'd be good to just go away and do something different for a little bit too.
Yeah, but when you started applying for gigs in the US, you were saying that you sort of found out that a lot of them won't actually take like international interns.
So I think I must have applied to a bit over 10 initially, and then probably half of them, 3, 4 of them got back to me and said, no, sorry, we don't take internationals. And then, yeah, then there was quite a few others that just didn't reply, so I assume it was the same with those.
Was there something specific about those 10, or those were just the ones that you came across that were sort of advertising?
No, I think it was more, so I decided that I ideally wanted to work with football, so American football. I'd kind of decided that was the setting I wanted to be in. And then I kind of just, literally it was just the more well-noted ones that I applied to pretty much just out of hope. I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, I may as well to apply to some of the bigger schools and just see what happens.
So you got accepted to, was it University of South Carolina, to work with their football team?
Yep.
What was that like, getting someone who said yes?
Oh, it was insane. I still remember. I'll never forget. So I was living with a mate of mine at the time. And I remember being in the bedroom, like it was late at night. I was just looking through my phone. I just got an email from them randomly got an email saying, we're happy to accept you, like based on a few things. So I had to go through a few different processes in terms of like an interview and all that sort of stuff. But they're like, provisionally, we're happy to accept. It blew my mind. Like I was like, because I had fully expected I would apply to all these ones, get rejected, then 6 months down the track, I'd know the process and be able to get accepted then. So it kind of blew my mind, because then the next step was I only had 10 weeks, whatever, till I had to go.
Did you have a passport?
Yeah, I had a passport.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I was just lucky.
So you got accepted, you had 10 weeks. When did you, would you get there at like start of the year, end of the year? Like, is it tied to like when their preseason starts, or they're just like, no, we got an opening, we'll take it? So
they run 3 or 4 internships a year. So they'll just start, so it's just four,
like a term based or something like that? Yeah,
exactly like that. So it's just 4, I don't know if it's 4, it might be 3 or 4 blocks each year. Or maybe it's 2, I don't know. But yeah, there's a couple of different cycles. So all the internships pretty much sync up with all the different colleges, particularly the football ones, because their seasons all start at the same time. So they'll have like a couple of different blocks of interns where different interns come in.
Does that mean you can potentially like cycle through different schools? So you do one and then, you sort of develop some relationships there and then say, look, you've got this second round of internships coming up after this at other places. Is there anywhere you could recommend me to? So can you like hop from one school to the next potentially?
Absolutely. That is 100%. That's exactly what they do. Oh, so really? These interns will essentially bounce around. Most of them will do at least 2 or 3 internships in the bid to try and get a job. It's very competitive over there. So these guys in the internships are really like kissing a lot of ass and like trying to make themselves look good. And that's the whole idea. You do an internship, get a recommendation from the coaches there, then you go do another internship somewhere else, and they just keep building up those recommendations in hope that when a job comes up, you apply and you have those recommendations behind you and you've done well in those internships to help you get that job. So
if someone else wanted to sort of follow that path, I guess it's almost similar to getting into the like FIFO jobs or mines here. It's like, it doesn't necessarily matter what job you get. You just got to get one. And then you sort of got your foot in the door. You start developing a reputation based on your work and develop relationships. And then you can worry about where you actually want to go after that maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So guys will bounce around and do these internships. Then say a job comes up at a low-level school. They apply for that job. They might get this job at that low-level school, and then the idea is for them to just build from there.
Okay. So what's that? I mean, I really have. You see, like, I don't know if you watch like Last Chance U on Netflix or something like that, and they have like snippets of like the interns, but I think they've only shown like 1 or 2 schools at this point. So what's that like being an intern? Because South Carolina's, I think it's it'd be a community college, wouldn't it?
No, so it's a big school.
Is it?
Yeah. So their football team is borderline top 25 Division 1 team.
Oh, okay.
So they were a pretty big school for what they do for football anyway. But the actual experience itself was unreal. In terms of being an intern, like I kind of alluded to before, it was very competitive. All the interns are kind of friendly, but they're competing against each other at the same time. But it was interesting for me because I was never planning on staying over there and trying to get a job. So I was kind of like a backseat to that.
Yeah, so you can just like
observe and
enjoy it. And yeah.
Because I was still working hard and I was still doing everything I had to do and busting my ass and stuff. But like at the same time, I wasn't trying to get one over anyone. So I kind of had the advantage from that point of view.
So do you like live on campus? Do you have to find a place when you get there?
So I had to organise all my own stuff. They were like, we're happy to take you, but you have to organise all your stuff.
Did you do that from Australia or did you get there early and just sort of, or you just got there and like, I don't know, I'll figure it out?
Nah, so I Airbnb'd it all.
Oh, really?
So I just used Airbnb and pre-booked all my accommodation.
Holy shit, that must have been expensive.
Yeah, it was. And looking back on it, like that's where I like probably spent way more on that than I should have. But I just wanted to know that I didn't have to worry about it because I was on such a tight time frame that I was getting there the day before the internship started, and then I was literally leaving the day after I finished. So I didn't really have any time. So I just wanted to be able to get there, know I've got my accommodation sorted, and just be able to go into it.
So what was the job? What were your like roles and responsibilities while you were over there? So
we were essentially strength and conditioning coaches, but then we just had to do all the little shit jobs that come with that. Like we'd have to like a lot of cleaning of the gym and a lot of random things as well. The S&C coaches do a lot more than just coach over there as well though. They go to the actual team practices and help out there however they can. And they generally just help out with all other areas in any way possible.
So they're almost like, you know, when they're not doing their S&C stuff, do they just become like a roamer? It's like, you know, if there's a job to do, well,
yeah, pretty much. And some of the S&C coaches were good football players back in their day. So they might, when they go to the team practices, they might go and help with the position-specific athletes who that play in their position. So they kind of help out with little extra things like that as well.
So, you don't... you played like rugby league, but do you have any experience with American football or even like flag football or anything like that?
Not playing, but I understand the game from playing Madden.
Oh, okay.
That's literally it. Like, so growing up playing Madden, I never thought that would come in handy, but I understand I know how the basics of how the game works, the positions, what's physically required in all the positions and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, because there's like 40 people on a team or something?
50 plus.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in a whole squad, yeah.
Because you've got like your offense, your defense, special teams, and then probably a whole bunch of reserves.
Yeah, so within that, so there's 11 players on the field. So within that, you got your offense, defense, which is like that's your 22 players. And then you might have, I don't know how many actually suit up for a game, probably 30 something. But then they have all extra players on that. They have development players who don't play and things like that too. So yeah, it's a whole squad of 55 or something like that.
So did you get the practical experience you wanted out of it?
Oh, definitely. Like, so when we first got there, they were like, for the first couple of sessions, you guys can just observe and kind of get a feel for how it works, sit back for the first week and see what happens. Then the second week, we'll kind of throw you into it. That never happened. Very first session, like all the players come in and sometimes you might have 30 players in the gym at one time and there was 5 strength and conditioning coaches. So then they obviously can't look after everyone. So straight away, you just pretty much just thrown into the fire and you start coaching. I'll never forget, like day one, I was like, shit, like... You just had to start coaching straight away and just kind of had to start figuring it all out.
So they've got their own training program when they go in there?
Yeah.
So you're basically just helping them through the training program?
Yeah. So how it would work is on all the racks, So the way this gym was lined up, there was just 2 rows of racks, like 12 racks down each side of the gym. And they would come in, the programs would be stuck up on the racks. So they're just stuck up on the racks. They come in, they know exactly what they're going to do, and they pretty much just get started.
Wow, so it's almost like that seems super efficient. It's like a conveyor belt approach to coaching.
Yeah, well, see as well. So with the NCAA, so college athletes in America, in Division 1, there's limitations on how long they're allowed to keep the guys in the gym. So they're only allowed to have them in the gym 1 hour at a time. So they have to be really efficient.
Yeah.
So they can't be any mucking around at the start or at the end. They have to get them in. We're start at this time. This is how it goes.
So, I mean, you wouldn't have had a huge amount of practical experience going in there, but now that, you've been doing this for quite a while, when you look back on it, what do you think about the quality of coaching that went on there? Not just in the practical side of it of helping people while they're training, but the programming that went on. And
yeah, I think the programming, there was nothing that I hadn't seen before in the programming. It was all pretty straightforward. They're massive on Olympic lifting over there. They love Olympic lifting. But other than that...
Are they any good at it?
So it's hard because they push it onto all the athletes, and some guys it just doesn't really work that well for them, but others it works really well for. Yeah. So you kind of get that mixed bag of...
Fucking drives, but I see it a lot on social media where there'll be like some coach and their athletes, the power clean seems to be the big one for them, and you look at it and you're like, I don't understand why you're using that exercise when that's not a power clean. That's like a kipping reverse curl or something.
Yeah. And that is, you definitely did notice that variation. Like some guys could do it really well and then some guys kind of struggled, but it was just the thing, so everyone did it.
Do you have the opportunity to do you have the time? I guess maybe with an hour, depending on how much they got on their plate, you maybe don't have, because I mean, it's not a simple thing to sort of get someone up to speed with.
No, and the coaches, to their credit, the coaches were really good. They would be like, they pretty much gave us freedom to do what we wanted. So they were like, if you need to rein that guy back, do it. So they were really good. But no, if you were going to teach someone, they would more have to come in on their own time and kind of upskill themselves in that setting. So
it sounds like they gave you a fair bit of autonomy on how to do things within the boundaries that they've set. They're like, look, this is what's going to happen. Go achieve that goal.
Definitely. So how it would work is they would assign us racks. So each intern would have each coach would have 2 or 3 racks that they'd be looking after to make sure all the racks were looked after. So including the interns. So I had 2 racks, and depending on the day or time slot, there'd be 3 people at each rack. So you'd be looking after those 6 guys. So it was your responsibility essentially to make sure they get through the program, and you're kind of monitoring the weight. You're loosely monitoring the weights they're using and all this sort of stuff. So you were kind of in charge of that.
So I don't know how optimal that approach would be from the athlete's side of it, but for a coach after practical experience, that seems... off the top of my head, I can't really think of a better way to do it, where you're sort of going, look, these are your boundaries. You're free to work within those boundaries. You've got time constraints, which means you need to learn how to problem solve quickly, and you need to learn how to prioritize, and you can't, fart ass around with your coaching cues. You have to be super precise in what you tell people to do. It seems like a really good environment to learn the practical side of coaching.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, you're just thrown straight. We were thrown straight in from day one, so it was kind of like sink or swim. So start figuring it out straight away.
Yeah,
you had to find ways to make it work, and it's a very constrained environment. So you obviously have those time pressures, and you have a million athletes in there at once. So you kind of have to figure out how to make it work within those boundaries.
Do most people? It's sort of sink or swim. Do most people swim, or was there anyone who was sort of, they get to a point and they're just like, look, you're not ready?
No, most of the interns I was with they did pretty well.
Yeah.
There was varying levels of how well everyone did, obviously, which is always going to happen. But no, there was definitely no one who struggled significantly compared to everyone else.
Okay. So you've said on your own podcast, I think a couple of times, that sort of athlete development is your primary interest. Can you sort of explain what athlete development means?
So basically, I guess the backstory to all this too is a good way to kind of fill the gap there. When I was younger, so I played a lot of sport and I always loved sport. But I was never the greatest athlete ever. But what I figured out is by being as fit as I possibly could and as strong as I possibly could, you could kind of close the gap on some of those better athletes. But growing up, I never had anyone, there was no one to turn to help you learn how to do that. So that's kind of where that passion for that, for athlete development kind of began. So that's kind of what I see that athlete development field as is.
So what are you developing? Is it like game IQ? Is it just physical fitness and preparedness, or is it like a whole bunch of different things?
I guess it depends on the specific athlete in the sport, but generally just the strength and conditioning side of things. So generally looking at the physical, neurological capacities, generally that's pretty much basically the majority of it. Trying to physically prepare an athlete as best you possibly can for their sport. So
do you get the chance to do a lot of that sort of stuff now?
Yeah, I'm kind of fortunate where I do get to do quite a bit of that at the moment, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, well, like what sort of athletes are you working with? Like what sports?
So it kind of varies. Lots of rugby. I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of female rugby players here in Canberra.
Yeah, because that's sort of growing quite a bit at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's one of the ones where there's still that it's not quite fully professional yet. Even the girls who play for, say, the Brumbies.
Yeah, so you've probably got a little bit more work to do, maybe.
Yeah, and they're not kind of like they do the best they can. Obviously, those clubs with the limited money they get for the women's game, but they're not kind of fully looked after. So the girls who are kind of really looking to fill that gap between what they fill that gap for and what they need, they kind of look for places to turn to. And private sector strength and conditioning in Australia is still very underdeveloped. Most athletes don't even realise it's an actual thing.
What do you mean, like the what's underdeveloped about it? Like there's just not that much of it, or is it the quality?
There's just not that much, and there's just not the awareness around it. Yeah. So in America, I keep comparing to America because they're kind of the ones who pioneered this type of stuff. But in America, there's a lot of professional athletes who will go and work with these private sector coaches in their off seasons.
And some of them are quite big, quite well known.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they'll sort of do like prep, almost like prep school for combine and. Yeah. Okay. So I've got one, and then we're going to be pretty much out of time. On your own podcast, you sort of said that, I think it was when you were talking about the lockdown and saying that, it wasn't that big a deal for you because you're a bit of an introvert. Now, I find introverts are pretty uncommon in the coaching industry. Most of them, really sort of gregarious, like being around other people, get a lot out of it. But I'm an introverted coach as well. And I'm sort of wondering what your experience of coaching is like as an introvert when so much of it is about people and developing relationships and being around other people.
It's something I've just had to get better at. It was something I decided this is what I want to do. And I knew that was going to be the hardest. That's probably been the hardest part about for me personally in terms of coaching, like developing more confidence and just developing that self-confidence and those communication skills to be able to do what you need to do, working with what you've got as well. Like I think a big part of it is accepting, okay, I'm not extroverted like a lot of coaches who like to be in front of everyone and yell and scream and make lots of noise.
Like a cheerleader.
Yeah, exactly. So you kind of like, and that's another thing in America. Like they're big on like coming to the gym, you have to be big energy, you have to be yelling out, you have to be making noise, you have to be doing all these types of things. And I was like, that's just not me.
No. And I think, I almost wonder whether it's counterproductive because it's sort of, it's almost, like if you're getting ready for something and you've got like massive amounts of supplementation and help and all that sort of stuff, but when you do the thing you're getting ready for, if all that stuff's gone, then you really haven't trained at all in the environment in which you want to perform. They're like, no, I want it, like it should be in your head. I need to you want that person to be able to self-motivate and not be dependent on external factors for their success.
Yeah, definitely. But over there, that was just the environment they wanted in the gym. They were like, they said we need it to be high energy, we need you to be upbeat, we need you to be positive, we need you to be making noise. We want these guys to be up as possible when they come into the gym. So that was just the way they did it. So just had no choice, just kind of had to do it the best you could.
Have you like carried that on? I mean, I certainly, I don't, when I see coaching at RealFITT, I don't see you as like, low energy or downbeat, but you're certainly like not loud and jumping around and all of that sort of stuff.
No, and that's just something you just learn over time. Like I kind of alluded to before, is being aware of what you are. So just accepting the fact that you're not that person, then finding a way to, like, you still have to get out of your comfort zone with it. Don't get me wrong, but it's about finding a way to make who you are and what skills you've got work. So that's kind of finding that balance between how do I do this, but doing it my way.
Yeah, because it's not necessarily. I sort of worry that people think an introvert is a synonym for antisocial, that you don't like other people or you don't like interacting with other people. But I find that's rarely the case. But yeah, it is. For me, the most difficult thing for me was the selling aspect in the private sector, especially for making income doing personal training sessions and that sort of stuff. It was just super uncomfortable for me.
Yeah, you're right. And you're right about introverts not necessarily being antisocial or not liking people. Because I find if I get one-on-one with someone, I'm fine. In that environment, I love sitting down one-on-one with this sort of situation, having a chat and then coaching someone one-on-one. That sort of stuff's awesome. It's just, you're right. Then the stuff where you kind of have to put yourself out there a bit more, that stuff that's not something that comes naturally to me. I'd rather just do what I got to do and not have any limelight on me and just go along. But it's just in doing this job, you just can't do that.
Yeah, and it is something that you can learn. And I don't mean learn in the sense that you fake it. It's genuine, but like you were saying, you have to find a way to do it within the boundaries of who you are. And part of that, I think, is to just do it and be uncomfortable for a little while. And then, once you've got that, well, it's almost like, when you get practical experience with coaching, you just got to sort of do it and see how it plays out and then sort of make adjustments from there.
You're right. And a lot of the fears you have around it are just illogical anyway.
Yeah,
you start doing it and you realize, what the fuck was I even scared of?
You sort of catastrophize and make it out to be a bigger problem, than it actually ends up being. And then once you if you recognize that you've done that, it can make it easier down the road. You're like, well, wasn't that bad last time? Maybe it won't be as bad this time. And it gets a little bit easier after you take that first step.
No, definitely. And I think a big part of it is the fear of the judgment of other people. But from what I've found, 90% of people are really supportive.
Yeah, people are much nicer than you think they're going to be when you're sort of thinking about it in your own head.
Yeah, you start putting yourself out there and you find most people are like, oh, this is really fucking cool. Good on you.
Yeah, I was listening to an interview with Simon Sinek the other day, and he was the guy was asking him, aren't you super nervous and scared when you go out and do a TED talk or something? He's like, no, because the audience is rooting for you. People, especially if you're coaching them, they don't want you to fail. They want you to be good. It's in their interests to want you to be good.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if you're someone who's essentially giving out free information. It's very hard for people to bag you when you're just giving out free information.
Yeah.
And then there are still people who, the term haters, there are still people like that who will just, for no reason at all, it seems, just send negative feedback your way.
And being an extrovert won't protect you from that.
No, not at all. It probably makes it worse.
Yeah, it probably hurt you more.
But that's also something you just get used to. Eventually it just stops. The first couple of times you hear negative stuff, you're kind of like, oh, that sucks, that hurts. But then you just get more used to it. You just realize it's just part and parcel of life.
And it's not as bad as you think it's. You look at it and go, is it going to matter in 5 years? No.
No way. And often these things, I'm not saying just dismiss it, because sometimes there might be some merit to what people are saying.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time I find it's coming from people who are in not a great place themselves. So you kind of keep that in mind as well. So you kind of be compassionate to that person as well. But yeah, it's like you're saying, you just do this stuff and then you start to get used to it and you just get better at dealing with the outcomes, and it just becomes second nature almost eventually.
We're pretty much out of time. I'll put links to your podcast and social stuff in the notes for the episode. Is there anything you want to talk about or anything you want to plug before we wrap up?
No.
All good?
Nothing specific, yeah.
Cool. Thanks, man.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you want to get in touch with Ben, you'll find him on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at CoachGriffin88, all one word. If you want to get in touch with me, you can find me on Twitter at critical_coach, on Facebook at the Critical Coach, all one word, and on Instagram as the_critical_coach. Cheers.